Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 2nd, 2026, and just a few days ago, on June the 30th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court, which we also call SCOTUS, upheld birthright citizenship and, of course, struck down President Trump's executive order that would have, ended automatic birthright citizenship for a certain category of people. Now, it wasn't a unanimous decision, which is surprising, right? It was a 5-4 decision, and with two conservatives, Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the Chief Justice John Roberts, siding with the usual progressives on the bench. And of course, many lawyers, left scratching their heads, people who are legally trained like myself. By the way, this does not constitute legal advice, but I'm a lawyer. I have a Juris Doctor from George Washington University Law School. And so, of course, I like constitutional law. You can't have plainer language in the U.S. Constitution than what you have in the 14th Amendment, Section 1, which is the Citizenship Clause. It says all persons born in or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction thereof, and the states in which they reside are citizens of the United States, right? That's plain. Let's remove we're not focusing on the naturalized, but regarding people born in here, right? All persons born in the United States, right, are citizens. Very clear. With the exception of the bone of contention was jurisdiction thereof. Jurisdiction thereof. That was the bone of contention, and that was supposed to be the sticking point, the reason why they went to the Supreme Court. They said, maybe people like people who are on temporary visas, F1 visas, that they're not subject to the jurisdiction, you know. Uh, but at the same time, you hear many people talk about the Citizenship Clause, and they say, well, the diplomats, right? People know that children of diplomats are born here are not citizens of the United States, because diplomats, they're immune to the laws and courts of the United States. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. courts, right? They're immune to U.S. laws. So people know that they're not that if they have kids here, right, while they have diplomatic immunity as accredited diplomats, right, in the United States, their kids are not U.S. citizens. Well, how do people know that, since it's not stated in the U.S. Constitution, right? The Section 1, the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment, that's what deals with citizenship, everything that has to do with citizenship. So how do people know that the children of diplomats are not citizens of the United States? Let me read the entire Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. By the way, the 14th Amendment, if you go to law school, they teach you that it's the almighty, it's like they call it the most powerful amendment in the U.S. Constitution, one of the most powerful. I guess constitutional law professors, scholars, they like. I think maybe if they're 14th Amendment scholars, they probably like to say it's the most powerful law in the U.S. Constitution, right? It packs a lot. But let me read the whole Section 1, right? And it's also called the Citizenship Clause. That's the first clause, though, because there are other parts that have the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause. I'm going to read the entire Section 1 just to show you that there's no discussion or word on diplomats, the children of diplomats being exempt, that they're not citizens of the United States. So I don't know how people know that, right? So let me read the entirety of Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So you see, it doesn't say anything about diplomats. So are diplomats who have their kids here also going to come and challenge our courts, right? And say, well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that their children cannot be citizens, right? Because it doesn't say so here. It doesn't specify and say their children are not citizens, right? But remember that the bone of contention, the reason why President Trump, went to court, Trump versus Barbara, which was just decided on June the 30th, 2026, just a few days ago, was because of this phrase right here, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right? So subject to the jurisdiction thereof, when it was written, this 14th Amendment, right? It became ratified in 1868. I think it was first written around 1866. It was ratified in 1868. In 1860, it was written 1866, ratified 1868. It was that to the jurisdiction thereof was actually referring to diplomats, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. It was referring to diplomats and their families, right? Diplomats and their families, because diplomats and their families are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, right? They are immune to the U.S. laws, and they're not under the jurisdiction of U.S. courts, right? So that's basically what it means, right? So that's how we know that diplomats, the kids of diplomats, are not United States citizens. Kids of accredited foreign diplomats here in the United States, that includes ambassadors and their families, they have children while they're here in the United States, while they're representing their country, while they're accredited diplomats. Their children are not citizens of the United States, right? Because diplomats are immune to our laws, and that's from the Congress of Vienna, right? Congress of Vienna, as of the time, because we're going back, Congress of Vienna in 1815, after the Napoleonic era, it cohered diplomatic privileges, including the immunity of diplomats. Because remember, during the French Revolution in the 1790s, 1792, when the French were basically decapitating their aristocrats, where they committed regicide and decapitated the king and his wife Marie Antoinette. They were trying to eliminate the sovereigns, the kings. So back then, sovereigns, a nation, for instance, if nations went to war, the reason why we had diplomats, foreign diplomats, was to maintain peace, right? And a foreign diplomat was a representative of their sovereign, right? Not the nation. So it was kings that went to war back then. I've done an earlier video in which I discussed the early kings of England. The early kings of England, William the Conqueror and his descendants, how they had lands, right? They were dukes of Anjou. They had lands in France. So back then, the kings, the notion of a king, the king owned the land. The sovereign owned the land, right? Nations were not representatives of we the people as we know it today. Today, like in America, our president doesn't own the land. He's our elected representative. He represents us, we the people. And there's the concept of consent of the governed, right? That nations, governments are formed, right, to protect the rights of the citizens, right? Not subjects. This was very different in the 18th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century. So during the French Revolution, the diplomats had come from, before the French Revolution, the diplomats were aristocrats. They came from the royal family. They were related to the king or whatever. And so once there was the French Revolution, the French masses, the mob, they seized the the diplomats, the foreign diplomats from other that came from other kingdoms, right? They seized them and they beheaded them, locked them up, and there was no, they threw away diplomatic immunity because the French Revolution, they were like death to the aristocrats. They hated the aristocrats. So the diplomats had come from the diplomatic from the diplomatic corps had been made up of aristocrats, people who were related to kings and whatnot. So they were killed, and even though the French Revolution, the revolutionaries ended and Napoleon came to power and became emperor, but Napoleon also was sort of against them, and he would typically arrest foreign diplomats as well. He'd arrest them claiming that they were spies of foreign kings and things like that. So he didn't respect them, he'd arrest them. But after the Napoleonic era, there was what was called the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and when they cohered international law and laws of diplomatic immunity to sort of respect foreign diplomats, and not mistreat them. So they gave them what's called immunity. They were immune from the laws of their host nation, right? Because they were just guests there. Today we're governed by the Vienna Conventions in 1961. But back then we're looking at the 14th Amendment, which was written in it was ratified in 1868. So they were their reference with respect to diplomats was to the Congress of Vienna of 1815, right? The rules of the Congress of Vienna with respect to diplomats, right? Back then, today when we think about ambassadors and diplomats, we know they have embassies. Like the Nigerian embassy has an embassy in Washington D.C. Different nations have their embassies, right? If you go in there, it's like you're in their foreign, like you're in their jurisdiction, and their diplomats, right, have immunity. But back then they didn't have a building; they could stay in a hotel. So it was them, the person that was representing the sovereign. I think I'll do a video and just talk about diplomatic immunity and the history. My purpose is also to talk about history. I enjoy talking about history, and of course American presidents. So 14th Amendment, the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right? We know diplomats, their children are exempt. Diplomats and their families, they're exempt, because that's what's subject to the jurisdiction thereof is actually referring to. So wouldn't the whole thing have been resolved, right, if those those up in arms regarding the 14th Amendment just considered that, okay, these foreigners, illegal aliens having kids here, are they diplomats? Are they accredited diplomats? That was the simplest question, right? Because it's right here in plain English. Are they diplomats? But people don't know. Because I think what had me scratching my head was when I saw pundits talking on TV regarding this, they would emphasize that, okay, there are exemptions, that is ambassadors, right? By the way, other exemptions also are invading alien forces. Invading alien forces were also included in that. Those that are exempt, they're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. For instance, if we had consider like when the British forces came and they occupied Washington. They actually did, and they had a child there. Would that child be an American citizen? No, right? Because the British, if an invading army is not going to, then they don't respect your laws, right? They throw it away. An occupying force, throws away your laws. It's not respecting your laws. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of that nation that they are invading. So, but typically we read it as the kids of diplomats, and this is, of course, been codified in our modern legal framework. Apart from back then, if we come to this day, it's in 8 CFR. CFR is Code of Federal Regulations, section 1101.3, right? So with respect to foreign diplomats or foreign officers who are accredited to in the United States are, they're exempt. They and their families, if they have kids here, they're not automatic U.S. citizens. So that's what subject to the jurisdiction thereof actually means. It's just talking about um, diplomats. Diplomats are immune to U.S. laws. They're not subject to U.S. courts. So what if they break our laws? If the diplomat is here, they break their laws, they keep breaking our laws. What does the U.S. do? The U.S. can't take them to the courts, right? They're not subject to the courts. Once they find out, oh, this person's a diplomat, they release them, right? The U.S., the State Department can expel them. Of course, the State Department deals with international matters, foreign matters. So the U.S. basically expels them or can dismiss them. Now, you can imagine if a foreign diplomat has a child here and you say they're a citizen, and then the parent breaks our laws and we expel them. They can't leave their child here because their child is their ward, right? Right? They're the ones, they're the protector of the child, so they have to take their child away. So, but a child has a right to be in the United States. So, because diplomats are not subject to our laws. Now, what about an F1? If you say, well, you expect if an F1 student commits a crime, do you automatically expel them? Yes, you have a right to revoke their visa, but typically, if an F1 student, a non-immigrant temporary student, an F1 is an international student, if they're here temporarily for education, they break the law, they go to jail, they go to court, they face trial, and they go to jail. In fact, there's a story of a Nigerian athlete who's a student, I think in Louisiana or something. He has a baby mama. He pulled out a gun, right? His baby mama is a black American woman, and he pulled out a gun and fired at her. Not direct, he didn't hit her, but he shot it to intimidate her, just to threaten her. They were in an argument, and he fired a gun. F1 students are not allowed to have guns, right? F1 students, because here they're not supposed to have guns. So he was arrested, tried, and convicted, and he was sentenced to 27 months in prison. Now, after he serves his sentence, they can deport him, obviously, because they're not going to renew his visa, his student visa, because the people they give F1 visas to come and study, they expect that they're going to, respect American laws. Diplomats, don't have that. They're not bound to do that. Again, they're immune, right? So if a diplomat, had it been a diplomat who did that, he would not have gone to court. Because he's not subject to the jurisdiction of U.S. courts. All America would have been able to do was to expel him, right, and dismiss him. They can ban him from ever coming back, but they can't go and lock him up, right? They can't try and convict him. So that's, unless they get permission from the embassy, from the government, the foreign government says, okay, yeah, we don't care, but the foreign government won't do that. Once you're an accredited diplomat, they protect you. So that's what subject to the jurisdiction thereof means. I'll do another video and just discuss the history of diplomatic immunity. So I hope this was helpful. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted.